I'm just going to share a few mission opportunities that are coming up. With COVID, we had to kind of take a backseat in some of the things that we've been doing, but this summer we're actually really excited that we're able to do some things again. So June 22nd through the 30th, we're going to have what's called a multicultural peace collaboration, and it's like a road trip through the South. So we want to invest in creating spaces for current generation of leadership and the future generation of leaders to be together and learn from each other over unsettling truths and the realities in our world. We'd like to focus on the efforts of bringing the younger and the older leaders together in historical contexts of interest that would allow the sharing of truth, understanding justice, and move towards reconciliation. So what that's going to look like is it's open to about 30 people. We'll meet in Montgomery, Alabama. We're going to go and spend some time learning at the Museum of Peace and Justice, which is a memorial to the hundreds of lynchings in our past. We're going to go to Selma, walk the footsteps of past marches, and then drive to Atlanta to be equipped by the Martin Luther King Center. And then that would be like 2 to 3 days, and then drive on to North Carolina, to Boone, North Carolina, where we've got some MB churches there. And what's been learned, then we're going to kind of partake in a peace camp. So if some of those things are kind of interest to you, come and find me and I'll get you some more information. I also just wanted to highlight a few other things. Tomorrow night, the Mission Club has a gathering. I'll be there too. And you need to let Lindsay know, right, if you're going to be there. So go find Lindsay because there's going to be Chinese food. So just let her know so they know how much food to bring. So that'll be tomorrow at 7 in the Lorenz in the basement. And then I just wanted to highlight another thing. Sorry, I will get to my little talk today, but there's just so much to just share with you. This January during J-term, there's going to be hopefully 2 global teams sent, and you can get credit through it. If you have more questions, you can talk to Craig Jost, but there's going to be a team going to Thailand to work with Katie Mount in a place called Monkey Mountain. And then there's another team that's going to go to France where Paul and Sarah Ragas are at, and they'll be working with North African immigrants there. And so if that is of interest, again, talk to Craig, and that would be during the month of January, and Multiply would help do some training for that, and it would be like 2 weeks on assignment, and then you come back for some debrief. So that's a little bit of what's going on. I'm just going to share a little short-term missions clip to get you pumped, and we'll go from there.
The harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. This is what Jesus said to his disciples before sending them out on mission. For 2,000 years, the church has been responding to this need. Are you motivated for mission?
I experienced that life shift, the difference between seeing it as an opportunity to travel or to do something that was going to be exciting for me to, no, this is like every day.
Mission can be everywhere. It's just not like going a year abroad. It's basically everywhere where Christians engage with people who do not know Jesus.
As I gave intentionally my life to Jesus, he really showed me that we need to love the people around us and that the people deserve his love as much as I deserved it.
Having an outward focus is living missionally. Having a focus that everything I have to steward, my clothing, my money, my relationships, my time, is the Lord's to use for his kingdom and for the advancement of his kingdom. That's mission.
Keep it simple. You don't have to prove that you can do a lot of things. You can just start where you at with what you have.
Jesus doesn't want your expertise. He just wants your availability and your heart. And I found that as I've put myself in uncomfortable places of wanting to serve him in mission, that the Holy Spirit is able to use me in unique ways.
If you're at a point where you're saying, God wants to teach me something, I want to learn more about how God's designed me and wired me to serve him well, what could possibly be more important than that? Than trying to answer that question.
Jesus calls the entire church to join him on mission. Multiply wants to partner with the next generation of disciples in responding to this call. Are you motivated for mission?
So that's a little bit of what Multiply is about. Right now we have 2 teams that are in Africa. We've got a team that's in Burundi and another team that's in West Africa. I can't say the country because it's an area where there's a lot of hot spots. And so I just want to share a few pictures because you might know a few people that are there. It's a 3-month assignment program. And so this is in West Africa, and this team has been specifically helping teach music lessons, teaching English. If you just know how to speak English, you can teach English. And so they're doing that, even though a lot of them aren't teachers. They're teaching English, learning French. You can keep going through the next ones. There's Luke Moore. He's been helping teach piano to some of the guys there. There's Cody DeRozier. He graduated this last December, teaching the guitar. And then the team's had some opportunity to be involved in some cultural types of things. So at the church that they go to, there's 5 tribes that go there, and they all speak a different language, and they have all their own cultural attire, and so each one is representing one of these tribes here, and they are just having a really good but hard time. And so if you think about it, keep praying for them because, God is working in some really amazing ways there. So let's go ahead and get started. Who here likes to eat breakfast? Awesome. Okay, shout it out. What are some of your favorite breakfast foods? Yogurt. Okay, eggs. Oatmeal. Got waffles. Thank you. That is my person. Anything else? Favorite breakfast things to eat? All right. Yeah, that is good. Mine would be waffles, and I grew up eating waffles with white sauce. It's not gravy. It's like a thin pudding, which sounds maybe really weird, but don't knock it till you try it. And then you put strawberries on it, and then you got to have some meat. So that's probably my go-to breakfast if I have the time to make it, or my mom makes it when I go visit. But today we're going to talk about breakfast. So think about this meal. For those of you who eat breakfast, you've got your breakfast here. Who are you eating, or where are you eating your breakfast? Are you eating it by yourself? Are you in your room? Are you going to go to IHOP and eat it and just have them make it for you? And who's eating it with you? Are you eating it by yourself? Are you eating it with your best friend, a group of people, a loved one? Or are you just simply enjoying breakfast by yourself in solitude? For those of you, if you can think, if you're eating your breakfast with a group, what are you guys talking about? Are you talking about the exciting things that happened the day before? Maybe the game the night before? Or are you talking about some really serious things? A lot of good conversations can happen at the breakfast table. So when your breakfast has been consumed and you're stuffed and you get ready to head out for the day, was that breakfast so life-changing that when you left, you were energized, full of purpose, and ready to face the day? Was that breakfast so life-changing that you knew exactly what you were created to do? I'm guessing, like most of you here, breakfast maybe isn't the time when you're like really awake or engaged, and it's just, a normal thing of your day. But today I'm going to share about a breakfast experience that changed the trajectory for one man in particular, and I'd like to call it the most memorable breakfast. This particular morning, this man woke up, and due to some of the big events that had happened in the last few days, I think it's safe to say he was a bit confused, at a loss of what his future held, and was probably carrying around some really heavy things because of the words that he had said about his best friend. The uncertainty of his life, he had no idea what it held. And so he went back to the one thing that he knew he could do: fish. This man I'm going to focus on in this story is the story of Peter. He's one of Jesus' 12 disciples, and it's the redemption story, all the while having breakfast with Jesus. So this life-changing story is found in John 21, where we find Jesus, some of his disciples, a boat, there's a large catch of fish that happens, and a beach. Now, the breakfast they were having, it's maybe not on one of my top 10. It's fish and bread. It's probably not my go-to, but in that day, that was a common thing for them to have. So Jesus had bread and fish waiting for them. So before I go into John 21, I just need to give you some context for it. So let me back up a few days prior to where we are now in John 21. Jesus had been crucified. He had been placed in a tomb, and it was sealed by soldiers. It was guarded. And then 3 days later, he rose again. And all of a sudden, he began appearing to some of his followers. One of them being Mary Magdalene. She had gone to the tomb. She was going to place some spices on his body. And when she got there, the tomb was open. And she had no idea where he was. And she thought that his body had been stolen. But then Jesus has an amazing encounter with her, and they have a beautiful interaction. She goes back and tells the disciples Jesus is alive. They kind of freak out, like really don't believe her. But then Jesus appears and he's there with them and they believe. And they're just in awe that he's there. Except for one disciple, he wasn't there. And so he said, I'm not going to believe Jesus is the Messiah or that he rose from the dead until I see him and I touch the scars in his hands and I put my hand in his side. And that man's name is Thomas, forever known as Doubting Thomas, poor guy. And he has an encounter with Jesus, and Jesus makes that right with Thomas. Which brings us to where we are now in chapter 21, where this is going to be the third time that Jesus appears to some of his disciples. And we're going to focus in on the conversation between Peter and Jesus. Now, I want to share a clip with you just to kind of set the stage for you just to kind of get a visual of how this could have played out. So you guys can go ahead and roll that and then stop.
After this, Jesus appeared once more to his disciples at Lake Tiberias. This is how it happened. Simon Peter, Thomas, called the twin, Nathanael, the one from Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and 2 other disciples of Jesus were all together. Simon Peter said to the others,
I'm going fishing.
We will come with you, they told him. So they went out in a boat, but all that night they did not catch a thing. As the sun was rising, Jesus stood at the water's edge. But the disciples did not know that it was Jesus.
Young men, haven't you caught anything? Not a thing! Throw your net out on the right side of the boat, and you will catch some.
So they threw the net out and could not pull it back in because they had caught so many fish. The disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter,
It is the Lord.
When Peter heard that it was the Lord, he wrapped his outer garment around him, for he had taken his clothes off, and jumped into the water. The other disciples came to shore in the boat, pulling the net full of fish. They were not very far from land, about 100 yards away. When they stepped ashore, they saw a charcoal fire there with fish on it, and some bread.
Bring some of the fish you've just caught.
Simon Peter went aboard and dragged the net ashore full of big fish, 153 in all. Even though there were so many, still the net did not tear.
Come and eat.
None of the disciples dared ask him, Who are you? Because they knew it was the Lord. So Jesus went over, took the bread, and gave it to them. He did the same with the fish. This then was the third time Jesus appeared to his disciples after he was raised from death. After they had eaten, Jesus said to Simon Peter,
Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these others do?
Yes, Lord. You know that I love you. Take care of my lambs.
A second time, Jesus said to him,
Simon, son of John, do you love me?
Yes, Lord. You know that I love you.
Take care of my sheep.
A third time, Jesus said,
Simon, son of John, do you love me?
Peter became sad because Jesus asked him the third time, Do you love me? And so he said to him,
Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you.
Take care of my sheep. I am telling you the truth. When you were young, you used to get ready and go anywhere you wanted to. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands, and someone else will tie you up and take you where you don't want to go.
In saying this, Jesus was indicating the way in which Peter would die and bring glory to God. Then Jesus said to him,
Follow me.
Ooh, sorry, that gets me choked up every time. So we find Peter out on the Sea of Galilee, and he decides he's going to go fishing. So fishing was Peter's livelihood prior to him coming to know Jesus. In fact, it's where Jesus meets Peter while Peter is out fishing on the very sea that he invites him to follow him. For 3 years, Peter and the disciples watched Jesus do miraculous things like healing the sick, raising the dead, healing people from diseases, challenging the religious officials of that day. And Jesus was always talking about a kingdom not of this world. They gave their lives to this man, even though they didn't always understand what he said or the things that he did. They knew that there was something different about Jesus, and they were willing to walk away from all they knew and follow him. So why now in John 21, after knowing all of those things, seeing Jesus do all of those things, why is Peter going back to the thing that he left 3 years prior? I think Peter and the others were a little uncertain about the future. Their leader had been crucified, rose from the dead. He wasn't with them anymore except for the random times that he kept appearing to them. And their calling to go be fishers of men got left behind, and they went for the temporal things. They went back to what was familiar and their former way of life. So they began fishing. Is this ringing true for any of you? You maybe aren't going back to fishing like the disciples, but maybe you had an amazing encounter with the Lord that totally transformed your life. You experienced freedom in new ways and were just on fire. You were all in, ready to go and do whatever Jesus asked of you. Then something tragic happened. Loss of a loved one. Maybe you're going through a hard season in life. Self-hate, self-doubt, depression crept in. The things of this world all of a sudden started to creep in and looked appealing to you again. And you found yourself going back to the very thing that you walked away from. You're frustrated, angry, and a loss of what to do next. Well, you're in good company because the disciples felt the same way. So in verse 3, Simon Peter says, I'm going fishing, and the others joined. And that night they caught nothing. Have any of you tried doing this thing called life on your own? The things that you're even good at, all of a sudden you can't even do. You don't have the strength or the energy to do. These men were skilled fishermen. They had done this for most of their lives, and they knew how to fish. And yet their efforts came up short. No fish. And so I'm sure they felt like failures coming up empty-handed with nothing to show for. And that was all about to change, because when Jesus shows up, things change. So I'm just going to read you a little bit more of that story. But when the morning had come, Jesus stood on the shore, yet the disciples did not know that it was Jesus. And he said to them, fellows, have you caught any fish? And they said, no. He said to them, cast the net on the right side of the boat, and you will find some. So they cast, and they couldn't haul it all in because there were so many fish. The disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, "It's the Lord." And so Simon Peter heard that it was him, and he put out his outer garment, and he plunged into the sea. But the other disciples came in the boat, for they were not far from land. Then as soon as they had come to land, they saw a fire of coals and fish laid on it and bread. And Jesus said, "Bring to them some of the fish which you have just caught." Simon Peter went and dragged the net full of fish, and there were 153 altogether, so many the net did not break. And Jesus said to them, "Come and have breakfast." Yet none of the disciples dared ask him, "Who are you?" because they knew that it was the Lord. And this was the third time that Jesus showed himself to him. So this is the second time that the disciples have encountered this miraculous catch of fish. The first time was back in Luke 5, and Jesus then calls them to something greater, not just to catch fish, but to go after people's souls. And it all happened on that same shore. Do you think when it happened the second time, they got a flashback to their first catch of fish? There are some differences, though, in these two passages. The first, when the miracle happened, Peter could not believe the miracle. He was so in awe of the Lord that he recognized his sinfulness. He knew that Jesus was different, that Jesus carried himself different, and Peter was overwhelmed by the sin in his life, that he told Jesus, "Away from me, I can't even be in your presence." But the second time, when Peter was around in this miraculous catch of fish, we see Peter doing the very opposite thing. We see him actually jumping in the water. He even took the time to put clothes back on, which seems interesting. Why would you put clothes on in the water? But he didn't want to show up on the shore without clothes on. And so he jumps in, goes all in, because he just wants to be in the presence of Jesus. So when Peter shows up, Jesus has breakfast waiting for them on a charcoal fire. Have any of you smelled something that is connected to a memory? For me, this time of year reminds me of track. I ran track all through high school, college, and so when I go outside during the spring, it doesn't smell like spring, it smells like track. I don't know why, it just always will. Or you walk by somebody and you smell a certain cologne or perfume, and it takes you back to dating someone that wore that cologne or perfume, and so you just want to, walk as fast as you can past them. You don't want that to linger. Well, the more I read about the Bible, the more I notice things like certain words that are used, even things like numbers. So I don't have time to go into all of it, but the number 153 fish actually has meaning to it. So if you want, you can go check it out for yourself. But words in the Bible have meaning, and there's a reason why they're in there. And so as I looked into this passage, I wanted to know more about the word charcoal fire. For some reason, that just kind of stuck out to me. Why did John even say that? Why didn't he just say, "And Jesus had breakfast waiting for them"? Because he could, but he made sure to say that there was a charcoal fire with breakfast on it. So I began to do some research and found that the other time that the word charcoal fire is used is in the passage in Mark 14. So I'll go ahead and read that for you. So it's Mark 14:54. Then they took Jesus to the high priest's home, where the leading priests, the elders, and the teachers of the religious law were gathered. Meanwhile, Peter followed him at a distance and went right into the high priest's courtyard. There he sat with the guards, warming himself by the fire. In some translations, it does indeed say charcoal fire. So I found that interesting that these two words are being used. And it was in that moment when Peter denied knowing Jesus. In the Luke passage, it says that when Peter denied Jesus for the third time, the Lord looked at Peter, and Peter remembered that the Lord had told him he would deny him, and he left weeping bitterly. So like I said, smells can be connected to memories. If you've ever had a traumatic experience, your senses are on high alert. You remember smells and even tastes associated with the circumstance that surrounded that. And sometimes it's hard to step back into that situation because of the emotions and the trauma that came with it. So do you think when Peter was walking the streets days after Jesus had been crucified and rose again, and again, like I said, he kept reappearing at different times, but Jesus was gone, Do you think whenever he smelled a charcoal fire burning, that took him back to the night he betrayed Jesus? I kind of think it did. I don't think it's a coincidence that the word is used and that Jesus specifically wants to make things right between him and Peter before returning to heaven, all the while sitting around a fire and eating together. He doesn't want the smell of a charcoal fire to be what Peter is always reminded of, knowing it was around a fire that he betrayed him. Jesus wanted to change that. Can you imagine if you were Peter and one of your last memories you had with one of your best friends was one where you said you don't even know the man? The shame Peter must have been feeling as he was carrying around that weight in those words must have been heavy. And here we find Jesus showing up, wanting to be with him. Jesus doesn't want to leave things undone. He came to make things right, and he comes to give us abundant life and remind us that we are forgiven no matter what we have done, and he is always inviting us to come and sit with him around a fire. Jesus takes it a step further, not just showing up with them and to do another miracle and have a huge catch of fish, but the conversation that followed between him and Peter was life-changing. So I'm just going to read those verses again and just let them sink in as you think about that scene that you saw. So when they had eaten breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" And asking the question, "Do you love me more than these?" Jesus strangely asked Peter to compare his love for him with that of the other disciples. We know at the Last Supper when Jesus tells his disciples that all of them will desert him, Peter makes it clear that he will not be one of them, but we know that that's not the case. So does Peter still love Jesus, and is he devoted to him? His response, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." And he said to him, "Feed my lambs." Now, just to clarify, the lambs that Jesus is referring to isn't to animals, but it's to people who are maybe young in the faith or the next generation. Jesus repeated the question a second time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" And Peter said, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." And then Jesus followed by saying, "Take care of my sheep." For Peter to follow through with that love for Jesus, he must give himself to the service of God's people. We see Jesus giving him leadership back and being a shepherd of people's hearts by teaching them and leading them in the ways of Jesus, caring for them and pointing them on the right road, just like a shepherd would do. And now a third time, Jesus asked him, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter was grieved, and he said to him, "Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you." And Jesus said to him, "Feed my sheep." What really grieved Peter was the 3-time repetition, because it was a plain reminder of his 3-time denial. We know that Jesus met with Peter individually on the day of his resurrection, but a public restoration was also needed, and that's what we see Jesus doing in this particular passage as he asks him 3 separate times, "Do you love me?" Jesus restores us by causing us to face our point of failure, then challenging us to set our face and our eyes on the work ahead. This is what he was doing with Peter. He had work for Peter to do and a calling he wanted him to step into. What God does that? What God has us go and have leadership after we've totally messed up and denied him? This is why the story chokes me up every single time, because of this significant conversation and how Jesus still wants to be with Peter. In Jesus' question about Peter's love for him, it's not that he was unsure of Peter's love. He knew, but these questions were said in a way that Jesus wanted to redeem what Peter had done only nights earlier and assure him that he still had a place at the table, even though he messed up. This conversation around a charcoal fire was different than the one before. This breakfast was one filled of redemption and purpose, a recommissioning of Peter and what he was called to do with his life. And then Jesus finishes that conversation with Peter and says, "Most assuredly, I say to you, when you were young, you girded yourself and you walked where you wished. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands and another will gird you and carry you where you do not wish to go." This he spoke, signifying by the death he would glorify God. And when he spoke this, he said to him, "Follow me." Jesus promises Peter that his life will end in faithfulness, that it will end and that he will make a faithful stand, but he will also be crucified. So if you go on to read the next book in the Bible, it's Acts, and you will see that Peter did just that. He followed Jesus with all of his heart, soul, and mind, and he led others to do the same. He had his first revival where 3,000 people came to know the Lord, and he was a man fully devoted to serving Jesus to the end of his life and shepherding them along the way. So when I think about breakfast and the breakfast Jesus had with his disciples, I see it was a reigniting of their call to following him, to go all out in their love for him and not return to their former way of life. Your chapel theme is Ignite, taken from 2 Timothy 1:16, which says, "This is why I remind you to fan into flames the spiritual gift God gave you." Again, another passage which is interesting that has to do with fire. So all of you here are probably in different stages of your faith journey. Some of you are on fire, burning hot, going for it, loving Jesus with all you've got and loving those around you. Some of you are maybe somewhere in the middle, loving Jesus, but there's still some doubts and things that are maybe holding you back from going completely all in. And some of you are maybe cold in your faith, and your faith needs some rekindling and stoking. And then there's maybe some others here that just have no idea what this faith is all about. To all of you, I want to say this. Each one of you, no matter where you are in your journey, each of you are welcome to come and sit by the fire with Jesus, no matter how big or small or non-existent your flame is. The invitation is always there to come and join. It's just whether or not we accept it. Jesus meets you where you are, and he isn't far away. He's closer than you realize. He isn't angry with you, but he accepts you with loving and redeeming love. And all he is saying is, will you follow me? So it's my prayer that all of you here, at some point in your walk at Tabor or after, will come to know the powerful and redeeming love of the Lord. And who knows, it might just happen at breakfast. So let me pray for you guys. Jesus, I thank you that you're always inviting us to come and follow you, even whenever we've messed up. And we can see with Peter that didn't keep you from wanting to be with him. You invited him to come and sit with him, and you recommissioned him to go and make disciples. And so, Jesus, I just pray that wherever each student is at today, that they would be encouraged that they are always welcome to come back to the fire and sit with you, and that you have things that you want them to do, and it's worth it. Jesus, I just pray that you would encourage each student here today. If there's those who are going through a hard time, may they be encouraged just by knowing that you see them and that you love them and that you have a purpose for them. May you just bless them as they finish out their semester here at Tabor. Amen. I think you're dismissed.